Yep. So your objectives are to describe the process of cellular respiration, although we're going to do the simple version today and do it a little bit more complicated in the next couple days. But we're also going to compare cellular respiration to photosynthesis, which is something you guys should be able to do right now, actually, in one word. If you guys remember, photosynthesis was this equation. What was the difference? I mean, how would you compare these things in one word? Photosynthesis versus respiration. You did do this worksheet the other day. How would you, or start on this worksheet, how would you compare them in one word? So this was photosynthesis. Respiration was just what?
The opposite.
The opposite.
Yeah.
That is one word that would definitely describe respiration versus photosynthesis. This is a reversible reaction. Instead of you making glucose in respiration, you're going to burn glucose. Thank you, Sean.
Yep.
You're going to burn glucose and you're going to end up making carbon dioxide and water when those were ingredients for photosynthesis to make the glucose and the oxygen. So it's just the opposite. Everything that we're going to talk about, even all the details, are just backwards. Photosynthesis starts with electron transport, and then you go into a cycle before you make glucose. Respiration just starts with glucose. You take pieces and go into a cycle that ends up in an electron transport, just go in exact reverse direction. If you take everything we talked about and just turn it around and go backwards, that's basically what respiration is. So we're going to talk about it, and it should be a lot easier this time. It should be easier to understand this than it was to understand photosynthesis originally, because it really is the same thing. You're just working backwards. So know that, understand that, and see that as we're going through. See how it's the same thing, just backwards. Okay, but cellular respiration, definition-wise, I had to change that color earlier because I couldn't read it very well. It's an aerobic process that makes ATP by breaking down carbon-based molecules. Things like glucose. Doesn't have to be glucose. It really could be like lipids that we talked about before, or possibly even proteins. Remember, we didn't like to use proteins for energy because we were going to use the amino acids for something else. But any carbon-based molecule, breaking it down to make ATP, that would be cellular respiration.
Oh, I know this. Air, oxygen.
Now, aerobic. If you just look at that first part of that, it says air, and it's pronounced like air, but it's not air, really.
Oxygen.
It's the stuff in the air that you care about. It's the oxygen in the air that makes this process aerobic. So you want to know that this air in aerobic means oxygen versus an air. What does an mean in front of anything?
Not. Yeah.
Not, or without. So if aerobic is with oxygen, anaerobic is without. You guys probably already knew that from context in like aerobic exercise versus anaerobic exercise. Did you talk about that in health or anything like that?
Yeah.
So aerobic would be what then?
Like
Like
running.
swimming.
Running.
Maybe?
No, not sprinting, but like long distance running. Be aerobic. Come on.
Actually, I think you got that backwards. If it was sprinting
It
in
would
a
be
short
anaerobic.
burst, you're going to have plenty of oxygen in your muscles that you're not going to have to start working without. It's when you're the cross-country kid that's in their third mile, that's anaerobic, because then your muscles are starved from oxygen because you've been without for so long, or you've been doing this activity for so long. So if it's a short burst thing, right, if Damien's in the weight room, it's probably aerobic, right? But if you are a cross-country runner, or actually swimming is majorly anaerobic in a lot of cases because you have to hold your breath half the time while you're doing it. And so I have a ton of respect for those guys that can do like 50 laps swimming. That's ridiculous. Swimming itself is enough exertion as is, let alone doing that over and over again and holding your breath half the time. So anaerobic is that you've been doing it for a really long time and your muscles are starved from oxygen. Aerobic is when you still have plenty of oxygen, right? It's short burst usually. So initially, like even from a reference for like basketball, right? It's aerobic initially, but in the fourth quarter, it ends up turning into anaerobic because you've been playing for a long time, you get tired. Right? Whereas in some cases for sports like maybe volleyball or baseball, it's a lot of brief periods of going hard, and then you just rest for really long periods of time. Usually you don't end up in anaerobic of any kind. But you guys know the difference. This one you need oxygen. The other one you don't need oxygen. I assume you probably already filled that in, but just in case. You need it or you don't. Anaerobic, there's no oxygen available, let alone do you need it. Aerobic, oxygen is there. You're going to do that as long as oxygen is present because you can get a lot more energy that way. Okay, so it all starts with glycolysis. And that's when you're going to break glucose into 2, 3 carbon molecules. You're also going to get some ATP in this process. I'm going to start drawing my picture on a different page, but I'll come back. You guys got this? The blanks you need right now?
So should we grab a piece of white paper then?
It's not a very big picture. It's going to fit up here, so you can probably do it at the margin. But if you want to use that other piece of paper that you've already been using, that's fine. Just wait until I've drawn it, and then you'll decide how big it needs to be and if you can do it on that or not. So it's not, you don't have to draw it right away. So I'm going to take glucose. Oops, let's use black. And I'm going to split it in half to make 2 3 carbon molecules. Those 3 carbon molecules are high energy, right? And in fact, right now you guys should be thinking, oh, that sounds familiar. Because you had 2 3 carbon molecules that would eventually come out of the Calvin cycle, and you put them together to make glucose. Those are the same molecules. So in the process of doing this, though, you are going to make some ATP. I think it said you make 2 ATP. So if I'm going to make ATP in this reaction, then this reaction right here, going from big to small, that obviously is what kind of reaction?
Anabolic. Catabolic.
It would have to be catabolic. Why?
Because it's going to
Is it going to absorb or release energy? Release, because I'm going to need to use that energy to make this ATP up here. But notice, I made a mark on both of those things. That 3 carbon molecule still has a lot of energy left in it, and we're going to want to try and get that out. Right? The glucose had a lot of energy in it, but I've used part of that energy to make this ATP. The rest of the energy is still trapped in that 3 carbon molecule, that high energy 3 carbon molecule. If you're still struggling with that, you might want some labels here. So that one would be anabolic, this would be catabolic. This time it is going from big to small, just like you would expect. But remember, sometimes it's deceiving. That doesn't always work anymore. But this process, do you see in this picture anywhere any oxygen?
Or right there.
There is oxygen right there. But do you see any diatomic oxygen like this in that picture?
No.
No. So is this an aerobic process or an anaerobic?
Anaerobic.
It's actually anaerobic. So when I go back to this slide real quick, that next blank, it is an anaerobic process technically. You don't need oxygen to do that. In fact, when your muscles don't have oxygen, they're going to do glycolysis and they're not going to do anything else because they get ATP from it, at least a little bit. You can't do this forever, right? So, oh, Chris, you can't hold your breath for the rest of the class, no matter how hard you try. I mean, you can go for it if you want, but it's not going to make it. This process happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. And then this next step right here, you need to get those 3 carbon molecules into the mitochondria. So that's the next thing that I need to draw in that picture. So as soon as you get that filled in, I'm going to go to the next slide again. We good? Just mitochondria in there. Okay, so now I also want you to have a picture of a mitochondria. So I'm going to jam it in here over on this side. Not just generically, it's bean shaped, right? And then you have an inner membrane here that's folded on itself, right? Just make it kind of whatever. Doesn't matter how it looks. So there's an inner membrane inside of the outer one. That one's where all the folds are. Remember, you want lots of folds because that gives you surface area to do lots of reactions. But this next thing that was actually on that last slide, in order to get the rest of the energy out of this 3 carbon molecule right here, I need to get it into that mitochondria. I need to transport that molecule into the mitochondria because the rest of this process was actually happening in the cytoplasm, outside of the mitochondria. But in order to move that into the mitochondria, right, and build up a big concentration of those 3 carbon molecules inside the mitochondria, what kind of transport would that end up being? Would it be active or passive?
Active.
Ultimately, it's going to be active because you're pushing more and more of them in there. You're forcing them to go in there. And the problem with that is it costs energy. You're trying to get energy out of this. You don't want to spend energy. But at the end of the day, these 2 ATP that I made, it's going to cost me both of those ATP to move this 3 carbon molecule into the mitochondria.
How do you get it?
Because there's still lots of energy in here that I'm going to get out and over here. So there's a small investment here, but obviously it's worth it. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. There's lots more ATP trapped inside of that 3 carbon molecule. You just got to do more stuff to get it out. So it cost me the 2 ATP that I already made, but I'm going to move this into the matrix of the mitochondria. So you need to label that. The inside portion there. Maybe I'll just use a highlighter since I can on this page. The matrix is this space inside.
Is that where, oh my gosh.
And no, it's not like Neo Matrix. We're not going to have guys dodging bullets.
Is it Keanu, was something, what's his name?
Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves.
So it's not that kind of matrix. It's the kind of matrix that you'd ask your math teacher what that definition is. So
I swear to God.
it's just an enclosed space in here. But that's where I'm going to move it. That's where part of the reaction is going to occur. But the other part of the reaction happens on that membrane itself, that red membrane that I drew. So you also have this inner mitochondrial membrane. That's where the electron transport is going to happen. So you need a picture of mitochondria so you can label the matrix, so you can label the... So you might just draw an arrow and put matrix, right? Whatever you need to do. The inner mitochondrial membrane is actually kind of obvious. I mean, it's the membrane inside of the outer membrane. So you don't have to label that as much. Focus, guys. But the last thing on this slide that we need to focus on real quickly, down here, respiration also happens in prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are different than eukaryotes, though. Think about it a second. I'm going to draw a stick to pick on somebody, because you should all know this answer anyway. But what was the big difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote? Don't blur, because somebody's going to have to answer. What was the big difference? Remember, you have these in your cells, a bacteria does not. What is the difference? Zach? Nucleus and or a mitochondria. Any membrane-bound organelle cannot be in a prokaryote. So if you think about it, do prokaryotes have to move their 3 carbon molecules into the non-existent mitochondria? No, that doesn't make any sense. They don't have one. So does it actually cost them energy to transport that? No. So they're going to get more or less ATP per glucose than us. They're going to get more.
They don't have to push it through.
Because they don't have to spend that energy to get into mitochondria because they don't have a mitochondria. But what was the purpose of an organelle? Why do we want to have a mitochondria?
To produce energy.
More than that.
The powerhouse.
Why would you need an organelle for a specific job?
For you can do simple functions.
Why would those reactions happen better in here than anywhere else?
Because the mitochondria supplies the energy to the cell.
At the end of the day, you guys have to understand that the reason I have an organelle is because you get things like this, that 3 carbon molecule in sufficient quantities, right? There's enough of it in the right place at the right time that you can do reactions much more efficiently, and therefore, even though you get less ATP per molecule of glucose, you're going to be able to burn it lots faster, remember?
Yeah.
So, because the mitochondria is efficient for this reaction, even though you get less energy than a prokaryote, a bacteria would, per glucose, you can burn lots more faster and get that energy faster because of the efficiency of that mitochondria itself. So it is still worth the investment. It's obviously worth it, but at the end of the day, prokaryotes do get more energy than you do per glucose, but they can't burn it as fast as you can. Okay, next step. Once you do get the 3 carbon molecules into the mitochondria, then you start these 2 steps. And this is kind of the real meat of the actual cellular respiration process. So first we're going to start with the Krebs cycle here. So remember, you break the glucose in half, you have these 2 pieces that go back into a cycle instead of coming out of a cycle in photosynthesis. But those 3 carbon molecules are ultimately going to be turned into carbon dioxide. And you're also going to be able to produce a little bit of ATP along the way. So that's nice. I made an investment. I have 0 ATP right now, but I got a little bit back now. But still, do you see oxygen up here anywhere? Not the diatomic oxygen that I was talking about for aerobic. So Krebs cycle is also aerobic or anaerobic? Anaerobic. But finally down here, electron transport, that's where you're finally going to use your oxygen. That's going to be your final acceptor for electrons. So the best analogy that I can think of for this, right, I'm going to take energy molecules from my Krebs cycle. I'm going to drop off electrons into electron transport, but something has to be at the end of that electron transport to catch electrons. If there isn't oxygen there to do that, that electron transport grinds to a halt. There's a big traffic jam. you got lots of electrons that are supposed to be moving down this highway, but there's nowhere for them to go. So they're stuck and they're all just in a big jam, right? So traffic jam is what I like to think of when I think about this. Because without the oxygen, the electrons can't move. If you have oxygen, they have somewhere to go, and then they can start moving, and that traffic jam clears out, and it starts flowing freely like it's supposed to. So if you think about a traffic jam in like LA on the freeway, I've been stuck in traffic for 2 hours in that city before. It sucks. But once that oxygen's there, it frees up places for those cars to go, and they just start flowing freely on that freeway again. So the oxygen has to be there for this to work, but otherwise, when you're doing this, you actually get to make lots of ATP. Now specifically, between one and the other, I don't remember what the number is, but you get a little bit of ATP here. Most of it comes from here though, and you're gonna end up with this number total. At the end of the day, most of it was from electron transport, a little bit was from the Krebs cycle. Remember, none of that was from glycolysis because I had to invest that energy. I couldn't keep it. So net per glucose molecule, you make 34 ATP. So it also, again, remember, it's worth it to put the 3 carbon molecules into the mitochondria because you get lots more ATP back than just doing glycolysis over and over again. So it's worth it in the long run, but 34 is that number. Okay, so you got 2 questions to answer here. One, I've already told you the answer to. The other one, you have to think a little bit, but that's not a problem. You guys are all capable of thinking. This first question, though, which stage of cellular respiration is aerobic? Remember, there are 3 stages. Your answer can either be glycolysis, or it can be Krebs cycle, or it can be electron transport. Only one of those stages is actually aerobic. Which one is it? So that's the first thing you write on your whiteboard.
What was it again?
It could either be glycolysis, Krebs cycle, or electron transport. Which one of those 3 was actually aerobic? The other 2 are anaerobic, technically. And then your second question. I didn't really mention this yet, so it's one of those times, rare times, that I don't actually tell you an answer before I ask the question, but I'll give you a hint at least. Why is it important that respiration releases heat as a waste product? On that last slide, you actually filled in a blank with heat, didn't you?
Yeah.
So there's a byproduct of heat here. And that's actually important to you. You need it, you use it. What's an H word from a couple chapters ago? Homeostasis. But you need to be more specific than that. So if you're answering that second question, it's about homeostasis. You need to be a little bit more specific. And why exactly is that heat useful to you? What are you going to use it for? First part's right, for sure. Third part's right, for sure. You need to be more specific and then answer the second part. That's good. Okay, when you say maintain certain temperature, it's that it just needs to stay out for
Maintain.
yeah. That's probably the first part. This is good for the first part. That's good. You need one. That was the hint, but what does it help with? What do you need it for? You're still working, kind of? A little bit more specific than that. Because that's true. That's exactly true. But I mean, one thing that don't look at it this way. Do not read this release word when you're trying to read this, because although that heat is coming out of the reaction, is it actually leaving your body? No, it's still inside your cell. It's still inside your body. So what could you use that heat for?
To maintain.
That's what you're trying to. Yeah, but it's more than that.
Oh,
I don't know.
Maintaining-
Tell us.
Maintaining, you could either be going up or going down, right? Are you trying to keep it up, or are you trying to
Wait.
drop it down? That's what I'm trying to ask.
we're trying to keep it
Are
at a
you-
level constant.
Are you using it to cool off,
No, we're
or
trying
are
to
you
keep it a nice
using it
level.
to keep warm?
Keep going.
To
Does that
maintain.
make sense?
Not for me.
Okay, so first part. So just the first question, Rhiannon. What was the answer?
The e-transport.
Electron transport. It is an electron, right? You can't use that symbol if you can't remember it's an electron. Because I remember that it's an electron every time. Second question, though. Now, more specifically than just saying homeostasis, to maintain homeostasis, Jake, because I gave you that part. What do you use it for specifically? It helps you what?
Stay warm.
Yes,
Sweet.
literally. That's all you need.
Hey, I put that.
That heat is lost by the reaction itself, but it's still inside of your body. It helps you keep warm, right? What do you do when you're cold? What's one of the reactions you
Shiver.
Shiver.
I
Is
did
there a
that.
reason to shiver?
Goosebumps. Yes,
What's the reason?
To maintain.
Just-
to stay warm.
Yeah.
Is that movement actually helping you run from point A to point B or anything like that?
The shivering?
Did you actually get anything out of it?
No, it's just heat.
But when you're burning energy to make your muscles
Oh
twitch
yeah,
and
yeah,
move,
yeah. You're getting heat
You
out of the
get
fat. Yeah.
that's the point. You get heat that's released, so you're wasting energy essentially because you just want that heat to warm up, which is actually completely different than like a goosebump. What are goosebumps for?
Create more surface
Wait a second.
I thought it was the movie of hair.
It's to make your hair stand up, literally. Because
Makes
unlike you,
glow.
other mammals have hair that covers their entire body. So if you look at a squirrel in the wintertime, they look a lot fatter than they would in the summertime because they have their hair.
Yeah, but
that
isn't it
or
the
a
same
fur.
thing? Because when we get cold, we get
Never
goosebumps
answered
because we're
the
trying to move our hair
Yeah.
over.
We are, but we just don't have enough hair for that to work very well. The hair on top of your head does, but
Yeah, I said it's cool when you get cold, but you said no.
no, I was telling somebody else.
Oh.
You told me first.
It is
So what would you write there, Mr. Soares?
What did you just say?
to keep warm. To keep warm. You use that heat, that waste heat, to keep warm. Everybody good with this slide?
Yeah.
You answered your question.
Or snakes can't keep warm by themselves.
You need the sun.
I can write it if you really need me to. First part's electron transport.
No.
Second part,
To keep warm.
some people focus on that release word too hard, and they think that your body's releasing the heat and it actually cools you off. Don't look at that. It's not lost from your body; it's lost from the reaction.
I got it first.
So it's keeping warm, not cooling off. Second question here. This is more of a prompt, and I'll ask you the question myself. We just said a moment ago, how much ATP do you get per glucose molecule?
34.
But we didn't talk about this, although we actually did talk about that. If you look at your notes, you should also be able to answer this question. This is a whiteboard question, don't blurt. But we did answer before. Did prokaryotes get more or less energy than we did? And then if it's more or less, how much more or less? How much ATP did they get total? And this one's not a trick. I know sometimes it's not more or less, it's actually the same. But this time it is more or less. But how much more, what's the new total? And how would you compare, again, one of those words, more or less? So, oh, that's way. I mean, part of that's okay, but it's not that much, more or
I'm a
less.
little nervous when Raja Davis did that.
I would have been more nervous if it would have taken the lead.
I got it. Is this right?
But to answer your question, that was probably the most stressful game I've ever watched in my life. I've never had that trouble watching Huskers, and I've watched a lot of heartbreaks. Oh, that's way too.
Wait, my marker doesn't work, so you can't see it. Can I use someone's marker that works?
Dude, all you do, okay?
Oh, that's.
Can I explain his act? Can I explain his act? You add that to it. You add that 2 ATP wasted in the mic. Don't do it. You can find it right here.
Did we lose this or who gets it?
Dude.
What is it?
Was that right? Was that right? Oh.
Okay, so some people went a little crazy on that, but
Well, how in the world?
it's actually very logical.
No.
And Chris is gonna explain this for us, because he has a good answer. Just
All you do is
point.
you take that 2 ATP.
Be quiet.
You just do that. Take that 2 ATP and add it to the 34 because it's not being wasted.
We have to spend that. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't have a mitochondria, we do. That is a cost for us that doesn't exist for them. So this ATP right here that we invest, they don't have to invest. So they get 2 more ATP than we do. So this value is 36. They technically get more ATP than we do. But why did you invest that energy if they're going to get more energy than you did?
To break it down faster.
Hey.
So when you go on to this next question, you should be able to answer it on your whiteboard, so I can see that as well. Why would eukaryotes invest energy in moving those products into into mitochondria when bacteria get 2 more ATP than you do per glucose? Why is that investment worth it? What's the reasoning, the rationale behind that investment? Why do we want to do that? Because we're going to get less ATP per molecule. Definitely. But when you say that word, that makes that word, yes.
Why?
I don't know.
Is that a big difference good for my answer?
Okay.
You're fine.
I didn't know.
That word is what I want to see.
You know what's
No,
like
it's letting copy off.
beautiful part, Jake?
What was a mitochondria for?
What's
What's any organelle for?
Did they draw it?
You drew a dot here.
Mitochondria gets us one reaction.
So beautiful.
But using mitochondria, you end up doing that reaction better or worse? You end up doing that reaction more efficiently or less efficiently? And when you're doing it more efficiently, what does that mean?
Faster.
No, it's more faster. So even though you don't get the same amount of day per glucose, you still get way
Like you got
more.
hooked up to one of those jeans.
That's the big thing.
Who told me that if you were there once before, they probably tried to get you to do it?
What's a capital D?
We're not talking about it, you were name.
I was. What?
You're already talking about the purpose of the RNA.
Yeah,
Because it's a major reactions.
Yours, but it wasn't a good race.
More efficient.
Okay.
So what would that do? Why would that be good for us? It's more efficient. It's a key word.
This one.
We can-
We're just fine.
That's a long
It is.
We're good.
No, that's
I
not.
have no idea what to do with any of that stuff that she did
Say
yesterday.
that.
You don't?
That, you're not pencil back.
I got mad at her today when I checked it because I love my mistakes because like we were on for many cycles.
What is
No, I just
the
get-
purpose for a organelle, Chris?
Is that what we do again? Do we do something today?
Yeah.
So what does that mean for you, energy-wise?
So we are the youth legislature.
Yes and no.
I need to start writing
More
like
efficient,
that.
you get energy faster or slower?
No, you get a lot faster.
You get way faster, right? That's the key to this question, that's what you're trying to answer. You got that, Jacob?
Copy.
Is the mitochondria gonna make this process the reaction that it has? Or
In the world.
is that gonna make you get energy faster or slower?
Nigger.
Niggers. Okay,
There you go. Good to go.
so you guys need to focus real quick, we got a little bit left to finish. Remember, we had something similar to this on the last overview, had multiple arrows just to make sure that you're understanding that there's more than one part to this, there's more than one reaction that comes together to make this work. You guys, right, eventually need to understand that carbon dioxide you're breathing out right now comes from what?
Trees. From glucose.
It comes from the glucose that you're burning. It comes from whatever carbon source you happen to be burning at the time. But even this arrow right here, that's not just one part. There was glycolysis first to split that glucose in half. Then you moved to that 3 carbon molecule into the mitochondria, and you did the Krebs cycle to break it down even further into the carbon dioxide. And this part here was separate. That red arrow basically represents the electron transport. So when you breathe in oxygen, what does it turn into in your body?
Water.
Turns into water. It's not enough water that Jake can stop drinking water outside of normal respiration.
That'd be a cool evolution.
But it's
If we could create one.
it is water, but remember, was the purpose of this reaction to make water? No. What was the purpose?
Get energy.
Why did it need the oxygen to catch electrons? What would happen otherwise?
Then the big traffic jam.
You'd have a traffic jam and nothing moves, and then the reaction doesn't work anymore. Okay, so we should be good with this. You have a worksheet already, hopefully, for section 4.4. I'll get you yours.
When's it due?
Boss!